Ladies and gentlemen, it's essential as we navigate the complexities of life to recognize the importance of understanding the nature of people, both good and bad, so we can make informed choices in our relationships. But let us be clear, when we talk about the evil in people, we must resist the temptation to reduce it to mere caricature or oversimplification. Evil manifests in many ways, and it is in its most insidious form, often disguised as something familiar or attractive, something we might easily overlook. Manipulation is one of the most insidious behaviors in human relationships, often disguised as kindness, affection, or concern. It is a warning sign that something darker lurks beneath the surface, and recognizing it early can be crucial for protecting yourself from emotional harm. Manipulation is not always as obvious as deceit or outright lying. It often manifests in subtle, covert ways, making it difficult for the victim to recognize what's happening until significant damage has already been done. Manipulation is about control. It's not about mutual respect or understanding, but about one person bending the other to their will, often at the expense of the other's emotions, autonomy, or sense of self. The manipulative individual often uses their knowledge of the victim's vulnerabilities, emotions, or desires to gain an advantage. This can manifest as a calculated effort to influence decisions, shift behavior, or even distort reality to make the victim question their own perceptions or judgments. A key feature of manipulation is its ability to operate under the guise of care. A manipulative person may act overly nurturing or affectionate, claiming that they only want what's best for the other person. They may make grand gestures of love or support to create the illusion of selflessness, only to use those gestures as a means of gaining control. It can be difficult to identify manipulation in the early stages because the manipulator will often appeal to emotions, presenting themselves as deeply concerned for the well-being of the other person. However, as the relationship develops, this behavior tends to become more calculating and the manipulative tactics more apparent. One common form of manipulation is guilt tripping. The manipulator may make the victim feel responsible for their unhappiness or distress, creating a situation where the victim feels obligated to meet the manipulator's needs, even at the cost of their own well-being. For example, they might say something like, "If you really loved me, you would do this for me," or "I'm so upset because of you, why don't you care about how I feel?" This makes the victim feel as though their actions or inaction are the cause of the manipulator's suffering, leading them to sacrifice their own needs and desires to relieve the tension. Over time, this can lead to the victim feeling responsible for the emotional state of the manipulative person, diminishing their sense of agency and personal responsibility. Another tactic often employed in manipulation is emotional blackmail. The manipulator may threaten to withdraw affection, love, or even threaten to leave should the victim fail to comply with their demands. This behavior creates a dynamic where the victim feels like they are walking on eggshells, constantly worrying about saying or doing the wrong thing, as it might cause the manipulator to withhold love or affection. The fear of abandonment becomes a powerful tool for control. The manipulator may also exploit the victim's emotional weaknesses, playing on their insecurities or fears to coerce them into compliance. Gaslighting is another form of manipulation that can be particularly damaging. In this scenario, the manipulator works to undermine the victim's perception of reality, making them doubt their own memory, feelings, or sanity. The manipulator may deny events or conversations that took place, accuse the victim of being overly sensitive or irrational, or even twist facts to make the victim question their own experiences. Over time, gaslighting can lead to the victim losing trust in their own judgment, making them more reliant on the manipulator's version of reality. This creates a power imbalance where the victim becomes increasingly disoriented and dependent on the manipulator for validation and guidance. One of the most dangerous aspects of manipulation is that it often goes unnoticed until it has deeply infiltrated the relationship. The manipulator's actions, though harmful, may seem harmless at first, or even rationalize themselves as being in the best interest of the victim. It may seem like the manipulator is simply trying to help, or perhaps they will convince the victim that they are the only one who truly understands their needs. But over time, the victim becomes entangled in a web of emotional dependency and guilt, unable to see how their autonomy has been eroded. A manipulative person will often deflect blame when confronted with their behavior. They may turn the conversation around, accusing the victim of being overly sensitive or unreasonable, or claim that the victim is misinterpreting their actions. This gaslighting technique reinforces the manipulator's control over the victim, ensuring that they feel confused and unsure of their own feelings. The manipulator may also use the victim's love or loyalty against them, saying things like, "If you loved me, you would understand," thereby shifting the burden of responsibility onto the victim and preventing them from recognizing the manipulation for what it is. Recognizing manipulation is challenging, especially when it is cloaked in emotional appeals. However, there are key signs to look for. If you find yourself constantly questioning your own judgment or feeling responsible for someone else's emotional state, it's worth taking a step back and assessing the dynamics of the relationship. A healthy relationship is built on mutual respect, support, and trust, not on control or emotional manipulation. Manipulation is not just about changing someone's behavior, it's about breaking down their sense of self and replacing it with a version of reality that serves the manipulator's interests. It is a warning sign that something is deeply wrong in the relationship, and recognizing it early is key to protecting yourself from emotional harm and reclaiming your autonomy. Playing the victim is a common psychological strategy used by individuals who seek to avoid responsibility and manipulate the perceptions of others. While it is natural to feel victimized in certain circumstances, a person who consistently adopts the role of the victim is engaging in a form of emotional manipulation that can be profoundly damaging. This behavior doesn't merely reflect an isolated moment of distress or hardship. It becomes a central part of how the individual interacts with the world, seeking sympathy, attention, and often control by portraying themselves as perpetually suffering at the hands of others or circumstances. Recognizing this pattern is essential for anyone seeking to protect their emotional well-being and maintain healthy relationships. At the heart of playing the victim is a refusal to take personal responsibility. The person who plays the victim regularly refuses to acknowledge their role in any given situation. They may ignore their own contribution to a problem, always shifting the blame onto external forces. In this state, they often fail to acknowledge how their behavior may have contributed to the conflicts or difficulties they face. Instead, they externalize every hardship, framing themselves as an innocent bystander who is constantly wronged. This behavior denies the reality that individuals can shape their own circumstances through their actions and choices. In many cases, playing the victim is used as a way to avoid accountability. Rather than confronting the complexities of life with its challenges and difficult decisions, the victim player seeks an easy way out by portraying themselves as someone who is always at the mercy of others. It allows them to evade the hard work of introspection, growth, or personal development. By framing themselves as helpless, they create a narrative where they are not required to make changes or take action to improve their situation. This can lead to a vicious cycle where the individual continually wallows in their perceived victimhood, unable or unwilling to see their own agency. One of the most damaging aspects of playing the victim is that it often places the burden of responsibility onto others. The person in the victim role demands emotional support, sympathy, and attention from those around them, but they rarely offer anything in return. Their needs become the focal point of the relationship, and their suffering takes precedence over the needs and well-being of others. This creates an imbalanced dynamic where those around the victim player are constantly expected to cater to their emotional distress, leaving them drained, emotionally burdened, and often resentful. The person who plays the victim becomes an emotional parasite, draining others of their energy and compassion while never offering anything meaningful in return. In many cases, playing the victim is linked to an underlying need for attention. The individual in the victim role often craves recognition for their suffering and will go to great lengths to make sure others are aware of their hardships. This can manifest in constant complaints, exaggerating difficulties, or continually recounting past traumas or grievances, even when these stories no longer serve any constructive purpose. The victim player might invoke their struggles in conversation, seeking validation and acknowledgement from others. They may even find a sense of identity in their victimhood, becoming so attached to the role that it defines who they are. The longer this dynamic is allowed to persist, the more entrenched the individual becomes in their victim identity, and the harder it becomes for them to break free from it. Another dangerous aspect of playing the victim is the manipulation that often accompanies it. The person who assumes the role of the victim can use their perceived suffering to manipulate others into doing their bidding. They might guilt trip others into taking action on their behalf or create a sense of obligation in others to help them. For example, they may say, "I've been through so much, can't you just do this one thing for me?" Or, "You're the only one who can help me out of this situation." These tactics create a sense of emotional indebtedness in others, pressuring them to prioritize the victim's needs above their own. The victim player may even escalate their suffering, portraying the situation as dire and urgent in order to manipulate others into acting out of a sense of pity or guilt. Playing the victim is often rooted in deep-seated insecurity or a lack of self-worth. Those who adopt this behavior may feel powerless in their own lives and seek to regain a sense of control through the manipulation of others. By positioning themselves as perpetual victims, they avoid the vulnerability that comes with taking responsibility for their actions and choices. It allows them to maintain a sense of power over others without ever having to face their own flaws or limitations. However, this dynamic is unsustainable. The emotional energy it takes to constantly play the victim eventually leads to isolation, frustration, and alienation. The long-term consequences of playing the victim can be profound. It can damage relationships as people grow tired of offering emotional support without receiving anything in return. The victim player might find themselves abandoned as friends, family members, or colleagues become increasingly resentful of their constant need for attention and sympathy. Over time, this behavior can erode trust, respect, and the very foundation of meaningful relationships. People who play the victim often find that their social circles shrink as others begin to recognize the pattern and withdraw from the emotional drain that comes with it. This victim mentality can prevent personal growth. When one's entire identity becomes centered around being wronged, it becomes increasingly difficult to see opportunities for change or improvement. The individual may miss out on chances to develop resilience, learn from mistakes, and take proactive steps toward a better life. Instead of acknowledging that everyone faces hardships and that it's possible to overcome them through action and self-reflection, the victim player remains stuck in a state of helplessness, waiting for external forces to change their circumstances. Playing the victim is a defense mechanism that, if left unchecked, can prevent a person from experiencing true growth, healing, and fulfillment. While it's natural to feel like a victim at times, it's essential to recognize when this behavior is becoming a permanent way of interacting with the world. The shift from victimhood to empowerment comes when an individual takes responsibility for their actions, embraces their own agency, and understands that they are not defined by their hardships, but by how they respond to them. Only then can they move beyond the role of the victim and build healthier, more fulfilling relationships with themselves and others. Narcissism and self-obsession are deeply intertwined psychological traits that can profoundly disrupt not only the life of the individual exhibiting these behaviors, but also the lives of those around them. At the heart of narcissism lies a preoccupation with oneself, an inflated sense of importance, and a relentless desire for admiration and validation from others. However, beneath the surface, this self-centeredness is often a mask for deeper insecurities and emotional fragility. Recognizing narcissism is crucial because it often masquerades as confidence or self-assurance, when in fact it can be profoundly damaging to both the narcissist and those who become entangled in their web of self-absorption. One of the defining characteristics of narcissism is the constant need for external validation. A narcissistic person seeks admiration and praise from others to bolster their fragile sense of self-worth. They crave attention and recognition, often going to great lengths to ensure they remain the focal point of any situation or relationship, whether it's through boasting about achievements, exaggerating their qualities, or simply demanding praise for things that others might consider mundane. The narcissist constantly strives to be seen as superior. This need for external validation can be exhausting for those around them, as the narcissist often becomes intolerant of anything that threatens their idealized image. Narcissism reflects a profound insecurity. Despite outward appearances of confidence, the narcissist harbors deep feelings of inadequacy and fear of being exposed as unworthy or flawed. To protect themselves from these feelings, they create a facade of superiority and perfection, which they present to the world. This sense of superiority is often reinforced through comparisons to others, where the narcissist positions themselves as more successful, attractive, or talented than those around them. However, this comparison is not simply a way of elevating their own self-image. It is an attempt to distance themselves from any vulnerability or perceived weakness. By elevating themselves above others, the narcissist ensures that they remain unchallenged and insulated from feelings of insecurity or inferiority. A key feature of narcissism is a lack of empathy. Narcissistic individuals often struggle to recognize or care about the feelings and needs of others. They are so consumed with their own desires and sense of entitlement that they fail to see others as separate individuals with their own needs, emotions, and perspectives. For a narcissist, relationships are not partnerships based on mutual care and respect. They are tools for self-validation and status. People exist in their world only insofar as they can provide admiration, approval, or material gain. If others are unable or unwilling to meet these needs, the narcissist often discards them or becomes cold and dismissive. This lack of empathy can cause significant harm in relationships, as the narcissist sees others not as equal participants but as extensions of themselves, tools for boosting their own sense of importance. In romantic relationships, narcissism can be particularly destructive. The narcissistic partner may appear charming and confident at first, showering the other person with affection, compliments, and attention. However, over time, the true nature of their self-obsession becomes evident. The narcissist demands constant validation and can become enraged or withdrawn if they don't receive the attention they believe they deserve. They might manipulate their partner into believing that they are the source of the narcissist's happiness, creating an unhealthy dynamic where the partner's needs are neglected in favor of feeding the narcissist's ego. This imbalance of power and emotional labor often leaves the non-narcissistic partner feeling exhausted, unappreciated, and emotionally drained. Narcissism is frequently accompanied by a sense of entitlement. A narcissistic individual believes they deserve special treatment, privileges, or admiration simply because of who they are. They may expect others to accommodate their needs without question, and when this does not happen, they can become angry or resentful. This sense of entitlement can extend into all areas of life, relationships, work, and social settings. A narcissist might expect to be promoted over others, or they may believe that they are owed a particular level of respect or admiration, regardless of their actions or contributions. This inflated sense of self-importance often leads to frustration, as the narcissist finds it difficult to accept that others do not view them as the center of the universe. One of the most toxic aspects of narcissism is the narcissist's tendency to manipulate others for their own benefit. Because they view relationships through a lens of self-interest, they will often use people to get what they want, whether that's admiration, status, or material gain. Narcissists are often adept at using charm, persuasion, and even guilt to get others to do their bidding. They may flatter someone to get them to comply with their wishes, or they may criticize and belittle others to maintain a sense of superiority. If someone challenges their behavior or questions their actions, the narcissist may resort to anger, gaslighting, or even outright cruelty to maintain control of the situation and protect their fragile self-image. The emotional toll of interacting with a narcissist can be immense. Over time, the constant need for validation, lack of empathy, and manipulative behaviors can leave others feeling emotionally depleted, confused, and unworthy. It is not uncommon for people in relationships with narcissists to begin doubting themselves, questioning their own worth, and feeling as though they are walking on eggshells, always trying to meet the narcissist's ever-changing demands. This psychological erosion can lead to feelings of powerlessness and a loss of self-esteem. The narcissist, however, remains largely unaffected by the emotional turmoil they cause in others, as their primary concern is maintaining their own self-image and feeding their insatiable ego. It is important to note that narcissism exists on a spectrum. Some individuals may exhibit narcissistic traits but may not fully meet the clinical criteria for narcissistic personality disorder (NPD). However, even those with milder forms of narcissism can still cause significant harm to their relationships and the people around them. The key signs to look for include a constant need for admiration, a lack of empathy, an inflated sense of self-importance, entitlement, and manipulation. The more these behaviors permeate someone's life, the more destructive they become. Dealing with narcissism requires understanding the underlying insecurity and fragility that fuels the narcissist's behavior. While it is impossible to change someone's core personality traits, it is important to set boundaries and protect oneself from the emotional drain that comes with interacting with a narcissist. Narcissism thrives on admiration and submission, but it falters when confronted with resistance, honesty, and self-assertion. Recognizing these traits in others and learning how to navigate relationships with narcissistic individuals can help protect your emotional well-being and preserve your sense of self. Silence as a weapon is one of the most subtle yet powerful forms of manipulation in relationships. It's not the absence of sound, but rather the strategic use of silence to control, punish, or elicit a desired response from another person. This tactic is particularly insidious because it doesn't involve overt aggression or confrontation. Instead, it creates a sense of uncertainty, confusion, and emotional distress in the other person. Silence, when wielded with intention, can leave the victim questioning their own actions, feeling abandoned, or desperately trying to repair something that may not even be broken. Recognizing silence as a weapon is crucial for maintaining healthy relationships and protecting oneself from emotional harm. Using silence as a weapon is a form of emotional manipulation. The person employing this tactic often seeks to dominate the emotional landscape of a relationship, forcing the other person into a state of vulnerability. By withdrawing communication or refusing to engage, they create a void that can be filled with anxiety, guilt, or desperation. The person on the receiving end of this silence may begin to second-guess their behavior, wondering what they did wrong, why the other person is no longer speaking, or whether they have done something to deserve this treatment. This uncertainty becomes the weapon, as it forces the victim to chase after answers, to seek out reconciliation, or to apologize for something they may not even understand. The silence is often employed as a form of punishment. When the manipulator feels slighted, disrespected, or simply frustrated, instead of addressing the issue directly, they withdraw emotionally and physically, leaving the other person to wonder what happened. The silence serves as a means of inflicting emotional pain, forcing the victim to acknowledge that something is wrong, but without offering any clear explanation of what it is. This tactic is particularly effective because it creates an environment of emotional instability where the person being silenced is at the mercy of the manipulator's moods. The longer the silence lasts, the more the victim feels isolated and helpless, unable to break the emotional deadlock without giving in to the manipulator's demands. This form of manipulation often plays on the natural human desire for connection and reassurance. When one person in a relationship chooses to withhold communication, it triggers an emotional response in the other person who may feel rejected or neglected. The silence becomes a tool to control the victim's emotional state, drawing them into a cycle of attempting to regain the affection or attention that has been withdrawn. It creates a sense of longing and desperation, where the person being targeted may go to great lengths to mend the relationship, even if they don't fully understand what went wrong. This creates an uneven power dynamic where the person wielding silence holds all the control and the victim becomes subjugated to their whims. Gaslighting is often associated with silence as a weapon. In addition to withdrawing communication, the manipulator may use silence to make the victim question their perception of reality. For example, after a disagreement or emotional exchange, the manipulator may refuse to acknowledge the victim's feelings or may deny that anything happened. They might avoid engaging in any meaningful conversation, leaving the victim wondering if their emotions are valid or if they've overreacted. This silent treatment can also be accompanied by denial, where the manipulator insists that nothing is wrong, but their actions, namely the withdrawal of communication, speak volumes. The silence creates a cognitive dissonance in the victim, where they are torn between their own experiences and the manipulator's refusal to acknowledge them. Over time, this tactic can erode the victim's sense of self and their ability to trust their own feelings. In some cases, silence is used to escalate tension and create drama. Instead of engaging in a direct conversation, the manipulator withholds communication to provoke a response. They may refuse to speak, answer questions, or acknowledge the other person until they get the desired emotional reaction. This could manifest as emotional withdrawal, where the manipulator isolates themselves, or as a calculated attempt to force the other person to beg for attention, approval, or affection. The manipulator may create a sense of urgency or crisis by refusing to engage in any communication, making the victim feel as if something catastrophic is happening. The longer the silence lasts, the more the victim becomes convinced that they are the problem or that the relationship itself is in jeopardy. In this way, silence is used to create emotional chaos and force the victim into a state of heightened emotional alertness, which can then be exploited for control. The emotional effects of silence as a weapon can be profound. The victim may experience feelings of confusion, anxiety, and low self-worth. They may feel emotionally abandoned or rejected, unsure of what they did wrong and desperate to make amends. In some cases, the victim may even begin to internalize the manipulator's silence, believing that they are unworthy of communication or affection, or that their presence is a source of irritation to the manipulator. This can lead to an unhealthy dynamic where the victim begins to walk on eggshells, constantly trying to avoid situations that might provoke another bout of silence. The manipulator, on the other hand, remains emotionally distant and indifferent, maintaining control over the relationship without having to directly address any issues or engage in meaningful dialogue. Silence as a weapon is often used to create emotional distance and undermine the victim's sense of security. In relationships where silence is wielded strategically, the victim may come to feel that they are always at the mercy of the manipulator's moods or whims. They may feel as if they have no control over the situation, and that any attempt to communicate or resolve the issue will only be met with further withdrawal or hostility. The emotional consequences of this silence can accumulate over time, leaving the victim emotionally drained and disillusioned with the relationship. In extreme cases, this can result in emotional burnout, where the victim feels completely disconnected and disengaged from the relationship, unable to find a way back to a place of emotional stability or mutual respect. The key to addressing silence as a weapon in relationships is to recognize the tactic and set firm boundaries. It's important to understand that emotional manipulation through silence is not a normal or healthy way to resolve conflict or express emotions. Healthy relationships require open communication, mutual respect, and a willingness to engage with each other honestly. When silence is used as a weapon, it undermines these fundamental principles and erodes the trust and emotional connection that are vital to a healthy relationship. Recognizing silence as a tool of manipulation allows individuals to protect themselves, set clear boundaries, and refuse to engage in a cycle of emotional control and manipulation. Only then can a healthier dynamic begin to emerge based on mutual understanding and respect. Betrayal of trust is one of the most painful and destructive experiences in any relationship. Trust is the cornerstone of all meaningful connections, whether in friendships, romantic partnerships, or even professional environments. It is the belief that others will act with integrity, honesty, and respect. When that trust is broken, it not only damages the relationship, but can also have lasting emotional and psychological effects on the person who has been betrayed. The betrayal of trust often goes beyond the specific incident that caused the breach. It reverberates through the fabric of the relationship, challenging the foundation upon which it was built. When trust is betrayed, the sense of security that individuals once had is shattered. It's not simply that the other person broke a promise or acted in a way that was unexpected. It's that the individual's belief in the other person's reliability and good intentions has been undermined. This often leads to feelings of shock, disbelief, and confusion. The betrayed person may find it difficult to process what happened, as their perception of the other person as trustworthy and dependable has been disrupted. What was once an unspoken understanding between individuals now feels like a fragile and unreliable bond, leaving the victim questioning everything about the relationship. The emotional toll of betrayal is profound. At its core, betrayal strikes at the heart of one's sense of self-worth and security. When someone breaks a trust, they often leave the other person feeling rejected or unimportant, as if their needs and feelings were disregarded. The emotional wound created by betrayal is not just about the specific hurtful act, but also about the feelings of inadequacy, hurt, and vulnerability that follow. The person who was betrayed may feel humiliated, devalued, or even abandoned, as the betrayal can be perceived as a rejection of the emotional bond they believed they shared with the other person. In cases where the betrayal occurs within a romantic relationship, feelings of deep sadness and hopelessness can emerge as the foundation of love and respect is crumbled by the actions of one partner. In addition to the immediate emotional response, betrayal of trust often leads to a period of intense internal reflection. The betrayed person may replay the events leading up to the betrayal, trying to make sense of what happened and where they went wrong. They may ask themselves how they missed the signs or why they didn't see the betrayal coming. This self-questioning can lead to feelings of guilt, as the person tries to take responsibility for the breach of trust, even though it was not their fault. The problem with this internalization is that it shifts the blame away from the person who betrayed the trust and places it unfairly on the victim. The individual who was betrayed may start doubting their own judgment or ability to assess character, leading to a loss of confidence in themselves. The impact of betrayal extends beyond emotional distress. It can also erode the individual's ability to trust others in the future. Once trust has been broken, it becomes incredibly difficult to rebuild. The betrayed person may become guarded or suspicious, fearing that others will let them down in the same way. This fear of future betrayal can lead to isolation as the person becomes unwilling or unable to open up to others or to allow themselves to be vulnerable again. They may begin to question the authenticity of every relationship they form, wondering whether others will prove themselves to be as unreliable or deceptive as the person who betrayed them. This lingering distrust can lead to a life of emotional distance, where the individual is unable to form new, healthy connections due to the scars left by past betrayals. Rebuilding trust after betrayal is not a simple or linear process. It requires time, effort, and a sincere willingness from both parties to address the breach and work toward healing. For the person who betrayed the trust, this means acknowledging their actions, taking responsibility, and demonstrating through consistent behavior that they are committed to earning back the trust they lost. For the person who has been betrayed, it requires a level of emotional vulnerability and a willingness to let go of the hurt and begin the process of forgiveness. However, forgiveness does not mean forgetting or condoning the betrayal. Rather, it involves accepting the reality of what happened and choosing to move forward, either by rebuilding the relationship or by letting it go entirely. In many cases, the betrayal of trust can lead to the end of the relationship. If the breach is severe enough, or if the person who betrayed the trust is unwilling to change, the betrayed person may feel that it is no longer possible to continue the relationship. The emotional pain caused by betrayal may outweigh any potential for healing or reconciliation, leading the individual to walk away from a relationship that is no longer serving their emotional or psychological well-being. In this way, betrayal can cause irreversible damage, leaving both individuals with emotional scars that may take years to heal. It's important to note that not all breaches of trust are intentional. Sometimes betrayal occurs due to misunderstandings, miscommunications, or mistakes. However, even when the betrayal is not deliberate, the emotional damage can still be significant. In such cases, the key to healing lies in open communication, where both parties have the opportunity to express their feelings and work through the issue together. The person who feels betrayed needs to feel heard and validated, while the person who caused the betrayal must demonstrate remorse and a commitment to making things right. This requires humility and honesty from both sides, as well as a willingness to put in the hard work necessary to restore the bond. Betrayal of trust also has a broader societal impact. In communities and workplaces, trust is essential for cooperation, collaboration, and productivity. When trust is betrayed within these environments, it can lead to division, resentment, and a breakdown of morale. The effects of betrayal in these contexts may not be as personal as in romantic relationships, but they can still cause significant harm to the cohesion and efficiency of the group. Individuals who feel betrayed in the workplace, for example, may become disengaged, less motivated, or even resentful toward their colleagues or superiors. In these situations, rebuilding trust requires a clear commitment to transparency, accountability, and mutual respect. Betrayal of trust is a betrayal of the emotional foundation upon which relationships are built. The damage caused by a broken trust can leave lasting scars, both for the person who has been betrayed and for the relationship itself. While rebuilding trust is possible, it requires time, effort, and a willingness to face the painful realities of the situation. Trust, once lost, is not easily regained, but with honesty, transparency, and mutual effort, it is sometimes possible to heal and rebuild, though some betrayals are simply too great to overcome. Understanding the impact of betrayal and the long road to healing is essential in navigating the emotional aftermath of broken trust. Evil is often subtle, creeping into our lives in ways that are difficult to detect at first glance. Unlike the overt acts of violence or malevolence that are easy to identify and condemn, subtle evil operates in the shadows, weaving its influence slowly and quietly. It doesn't announce itself with loud declarations of hatred or malice. Instead, it manipulates, deceives, and erodes from within. This makes it all the more dangerous, as it can be difficult to recognize until its effects are deep and pervasive. In many cases, those who perpetrate subtle forms of evil may not even recognize their actions as harmful, while the victims often question their own judgment, making it harder for both sides to confront the issue head-on. Subtle evil often manifests in the form of manipulation. Instead of confronting someone directly or coercing them with force, the person wielding this type of evil will use more insidious tactics to get what they want. They may prey on a person's insecurities, guilt, or vulnerabilities, subtly steering them toward decisions that serve the manipulator's interests. This can happen in relationships, workplaces, and even within families, where one individual uses psychological tactics to gain power, control, or resources without ever raising their voice or making overt threats. The person being manipulated may not even realize what is happening, as the manipulator is skilled at weaving a web of deceit that seems harmless on the surface. Over time, however, the manipulated individual may find themselves emotionally drained, confused, and trapped, with little understanding of how they arrived at this state. Another way that evil is subtle is through the corruption of values and principles. It doesn't always come in the form of direct attacks on right and wrong. Rather, it often erodes a person's moral compass over time. Small compromises, justified by seemingly benign reasons, begin to accumulate until they reach a point where an individual no longer recognizes their own ethical boundaries. In this context, subtle evil works by normalizing behavior that would have been previously unacceptable. A person might start by telling small lies to avoid conflict, which then snowball into larger deceptions. They might disregard their own values in small ways, telling themselves it's not that bad, until they find themselves condoning or even participating in actions that they would have once considered evil. This gradual shift makes it harder for them to see their own moral decline, and more difficult for others to confront them about it without seeming harsh or judgmental. In some cases, subtle evil is embodied in cruelty disguised as kindness or concern. A person might appear to be offering help or guidance, but their intentions are rooted in self-interest or manipulation. They may act as though they are doing something for the other person's good, but in reality, they are exerting control over them, diminishing their sense of autonomy or exploiting their weaknesses. This is often seen in relationships where one partner pretends to be supportive, yet subtly undermines the other's confidence, decisions, or autonomy. This kind of cruelty is often difficult to see, especially from the perspective of the person being manipulated, because it is dressed up in the appearance of care or concern. The victim may feel ungrateful for questioning the motives of someone who appears to be doing everything for their own good, but over time, the damage becomes clearer as the person being manipulated feels increasingly dependent on the one who seems to be helping them. Subtle evil also often comes through in the way people treat others when they think no one is watching. It's the whispered gossip, the small, hurtful comments, or the backhanded compliments that seem innocuous on the surface, but when accumulated over time, create a toxic environment. People who engage in these behaviors often convince themselves that they are simply expressing their opinions or offering constructive criticism. But in reality, these actions can have a corrosive effect on the confidence and well-being of others. Those on the receiving end of such subtle negativity may feel the sting but be unable to pinpoint the source of their discomfort. This kind of passive-aggressive behavior works by destabilizing the emotions of the victim, making them feel as though they are overreacting or being too sensitive. The result is that the victim often remains silent, unaware of how deeply the subtle forms of evil are affecting them. Another hallmark of subtle evil is the creation of division through the spread of misinformation or half-truths. This is particularly evident in social and political spheres, where ideas can be twisted and distorted to create animosity between groups. Rather than overtly attacking or vilifying a group or idea, those engaging in subtle evil may sow doubt and confusion, leading people to question their beliefs or mistrust others. Misinformation is often carefully crafted and spread in ways that seem innocuous or even helpful, but its true purpose is to divide, manipulate, and control. The subtlety of this form of evil lies in the fact that it is often disguised as an opinion or perspective, making it harder to challenge or confront without coming across as intolerant or closed-minded. The most dangerous aspect of subtle evil is that it often goes unchecked because it lacks the overt signs of more blatant forms of wrongdoing. When someone steals, lies, or commits an overt act of violence, it's easy to recognize and call out the behavior as wrong. But when someone manipulates through charm, spreads misinformation under the guise of concern, or subtly undermines someone's confidence, it's much harder to point out and address. Subtle evil can cause long-term damage, leaving victims feeling disoriented, isolated, and even questioning their own worth or perception of reality. Because it's so insidious, those who are caught in its grip often have a hard time even identifying what is happening to them, let alone confronting the perpetrator. This is why it's essential to be vigilant and aware of the subtle ways in which evil can manifest. Recognizing the signs of manipulation, subtle cruelty, and moral erosion requires self-awareness and a commitment to honesty. It's easy to ignore the small red flags or to dismiss someone's behavior as trivial or unimportant, but these seemingly minor actions can compound over time into something far more destructive. By acknowledging the subtlety of evil and staying attuned to the dynamics in relationships, communities, and societies, we can better protect ourselves and others from its long-term harm. The quiet, creeping nature of subtle evil makes it all the more important to stand firm in our values, question manipulative behaviors, and cultivate environments of honesty, integrity, and respect. Only then can we begin to counteract the dangerous influence of evil in its more subtle forms. Personal responsibility in relationships is the cornerstone of healthy and functional connections between people. Whether it's a romantic partnership, a friendship, or a professional relationship, each individual must take ownership of their actions, behaviors, and emotions for the relationship to thrive. When people in relationships fail to recognize their personal responsibility, it creates a breeding ground for conflict, resentment, and miscommunication. Understanding and accepting personal responsibility is not about blaming oneself for everything that goes wrong, but rather about acknowledging the role that each person plays in the dynamic and how their actions impact the other. At the heart of personal responsibility in relationships is the idea that individuals are accountable for their own behaviors and emotional responses. This includes being responsible for how one communicates, how one responds to conflict, and how one contributes to the overall emotional environment of the relationship. If one partner is consistently reactive, defensive, or avoids difficult conversations, it can create tension and frustration in the relationship. On the other hand, if each person in the relationship is mindful of their actions and takes responsibility for their part in the ups and downs, it can help resolve issues more efficiently and strengthen the bond between them. Personal responsibility also involves being aware of one's own emotional needs and addressing them in a healthy way. It's important to recognize that while one partner may play a significant role in meeting certain emotional needs, it is ultimately the responsibility of the individual to manage their own emotional state. People often fall into the trap of expecting others to fulfill their emotional needs entirely, but this is an unrealistic and unfair expectation. Each person must cultivate emotional self-awareness and learn how to regulate their own feelings so they don't place unnecessary burdens on the other person. When individuals fail to do so, they can inadvertently create dependency or resentment, as one person feels overburdened by the constant need to manage the emotions of the other. Another essential aspect of personal responsibility is the willingness to apologize and make amends when one's actions have caused harm. In any relationship, there will be times when one person makes a mistake or behaves in a way that hurts the other. The ability to acknowledge one's mistakes and take responsibility for them is crucial for the healing process. An apology, however, must be sincere and come from a place of genuine understanding and regret, rather than from a desire to simply move on or avoid further conflict. When people take responsibility for their actions and offer a heartfelt apology, it helps rebuild trust and reinforces the idea that the relationship is grounded in mutual respect and accountability. Personal responsibility in relationships is about being proactive in solving problems and not deflecting blame. It's easy to fall into the trap of blaming the other person when things go wrong, but this attitude prevents growth and resolution. Taking personal responsibility means being willing to examine one's own behaviors and reactions, even if it's uncomfortable or difficult. Instead of pointing fingers, individuals who embrace personal responsibility will ask themselves how they contributed to the issue and what steps they can take to improve the situation. This proactive mindset helps to avoid unnecessary conflict and allows both individuals to address problems together in a constructive manner. Personal responsibility also requires clear communication. It's essential for individuals to express their feelings, needs, and boundaries openly and honestly, rather than expecting the other person to guess or intuit them. When communication is unclear or passive, it can lead to misunderstandings and unmet needs. Being responsible in this regard means taking the initiative to communicate effectively, whether it's expressing dissatisfaction, offering support, or simply checking in with the other person. This not only fosters trust, but also ensures that both individuals are on the same page, which reduces the likelihood of miscommunication and conflict. In romantic relationships, personal responsibility includes understanding that love is not just a passive feeling, but an active choice that requires effort and commitment. It's about being present for the other person, making an effort to understand their perspective, and working together to meet each other's needs. It also involves maintaining one's independence, as a healthy relationship relies on both individuals bringing their best selves to the table. Relying on a partner to complete or fix one's emotional or psychological needs can be detrimental, leading to unhealthy dependency or an unequal dynamic. Both partners must remain responsible for their individual well-being, growth, and happiness, even as they work together to nurture the relationship. One significant challenge in taking personal responsibility in relationships is the tendency to avoid difficult conversations or confront uncomfortable feelings. Many people fear conflict or confrontation, leading them to avoid addressing issues until they become too large to ignore. However, avoiding difficult conversations only prolongs the tension and resentment. Personal responsibility requires individuals to face challenges head-on and engage in difficult discussions, even when it's uncomfortable. This doesn't mean being aggressive or domineering, but it does mean being courageous enough to address issues constructively with respect and a willingness to listen. Personal responsibility in relationships means recognizing the boundaries of others and respecting them. It's easy to become caught up in one's own desires or needs, but healthy relationships require mutual respect and understanding of each person's limits. This includes recognizing when someone needs space, when they are not ready to talk, or when their feelings need to be validated. Disrespecting boundaries, whether intentionally or unintentionally, can erode trust and harm the relationship. Taking responsibility for one's actions means being conscious of how one's behaviors impact the other person, especially when it comes to personal boundaries. Personal responsibility also entails taking responsibility for the relationship as a whole. Relationships require both parties to contribute actively, whether that's in emotional support, problem solving, or simply maintaining a positive and loving atmosphere. If only one person is invested in making the relationship work, it can lead to an imbalance of effort, which can cause resentment or dissatisfaction. Both people must take an active role in nurturing the connection, being mindful of each other's needs, and taking steps to ensure the relationship remains healthy and strong. Personal responsibility in relationships is not just about being accountable for one's actions, but also about being committed to the partnership and the collective effort it takes to keep the bond alive. When both individuals in a relationship embrace personal responsibility, the relationship becomes a healthier, more fulfilling space for both parties. It creates a dynamic where both people are accountable for their actions, communicate openly, and work together to resolve issues. Personal responsibility in relationships doesn't mean expecting perfection or never making mistakes, but it does mean taking ownership of one's behaviors and being proactive in addressing challenges. This sense of accountability lays the foundation for trust, mutual respect, and emotional growth, allowing the relationship to flourish in a way that benefits both individuals. In conclusion, personal responsibility is the bedrock upon which strong, healthy relationships are built. By recognizing and owning our actions, emotions, and behaviors, we create an environment of trust, respect, and mutual growth. Relationships thrive when both individuals actively engage in their own personal development and contribute to the well-being of the connection. Whether it's through effective communication, accountability, or the willingness to address issues head-on, personal responsibility ensures that relationships are not only sustainable but also fulfilling. When we take responsibility for our part, we pave the way for deeper emotional bonds and more meaningful connections. Thank you for your time and attention. May you carry these principles of personal responsibility with you in all of your relationships, and may they guide you toward greater understanding and harmony with those around you. Good luck on your journey, and always remember that the key to healthy relationships starts with the responsibility you take for yourself and the love you share with others.